And in a matter of a day, we had 10,000 people write us and complain that we had ruined their holiday. And I and the president of the brand and others in the brand wrote everybody back and did a lot to win people's business back. But I said to myself, never again. And so much of the success that you talked about with the latest Cinco de Mayo has been building. The last couple of years have been amazing because we learned our lesson.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
I just love the satisfaction of checking things off my to-do list. For me, it's my email inbox. I keep all my to-dos in there, plus all the emails I receive, of course. And when I start with a full inbox and end the day with an empty one, at least a nearly empty one, it's a good day. And, you know, this reminds me of something my next guest said in her application. She talked about the same thing, the idea of like, okay, here's the best career lesson. Don't just focus on that list of activities and getting everything checked off the activities, right? Make sure you do the right activities. It's so much easier to just make a list and check them off. But when you do those right activities, you'll get real success. She's going to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories from her impressive career. I'm so glad to welcome Edith Ann Ramey, the CMO of On the Border Mexican Grill and Cantina. Thanks for joining us, Edith Ann.
Thank you for having me. I can check that off the list that we've done this today. I'll feel good too.
There you go. And hopefully it's also the right thing to do. So we got both things
Absolutely.
there.
Absolutely.
So let's look. I want people to know who I'm talking to. Really impressive background here. I'm going to try to fire it off pretty rapidly just so people understand. You started in PR working for both Burson Marsteller and Fleischmann Hillard. You did field marketing at Pizza Hut. You did brand marketing at Cadbury Schweppes for the Mott's Clamato brand. Brand marketing at Nokia. You were the vice president of marketing at Brinker's International after working for both its Chili's and Maggiano's Little Italy brands. You were senior director of marketing brand extensions at Topgolf. And now you are the Chief Marketing Officer at On the Border Mexican Grill and Cantina. So, by the way, those are some fun brands you got right there. Those are some fun brands you worked with.
I love all the brands I work for. It's a lot of people. I mean, who doesn't love food, right? It's been a lot of fun.
Food fun, and golf. So you've managed teams of 40 plus. You've managed $150 million worth of marketing dollars. And now, if people have never heard of On the Border is a 40-year-old restaurant brand with 115 locations in 29 states in Asia with $361 million in revenue. The brand is owned by Argonne Capital Group. You were not in Jacksonville, Florida yet, so you got to come here because I hadn't heard of it yet. But when I saw the impressive reach of the brand, I was like, that's someone we got to talk to. So what is your day like as CMO for On the Border?
Well, incredibly, no day's the same. You're constantly thinking about one thing, of course, which is driving people in and making sure that they love the food and they love the margaritas and they keep coming back. But every day feels different because there's some days where it's all about the new promotions and programs. Some days it's all about just research and understanding kind of what's going on with the business. And that's what I love about my job is that while the one objective remains the same, I need to drive sales and traffic and I need to bring people in and delight them, how I do it every day changes. And that makes it a lot of fun.
Yes, I like that you didn't just say bring people in. You said bring people in and delight them. Because we want them to come back. We have a lot of options. Yeah.
That's right.
So let's take a look at some of the lessons you learned from the things you made in your career. And this first one, so when I think of a restaurant, I think probably one of the industries that was hit the hardest by COVID. Maybe there were a few other that hit hard, but boy, I bet restaurants were hit really hard. And here's a lesson you learned. We talked about, I'm a planner, so I know this feeling. You're a planner too. You love that checklist, but sometimes you have to throw the business model out. So how did you learn this? How did you learn to pivot?
Yeah, I mean, the days following the shutdown were some of the darkest, not only personally, but just for our industry. And it almost seemed like all of us thought, are we even going to make it? And what a terrible, dark place to be. And as a planner and as somebody who had the plan and has a plan every year, to not be able to execute the plan just felt insane. And so I remember being very specific and very thoughtful about what if I thought very differently? What if I stop panicking and think about the levers that I can pull? Because there's some things you can't help, like you can't help the pandemic, but you can certainly help the fact that you can sell alcohol to go, or you can have cool bundles and promotions for to go. Hey, the business has shifted. Your business plan has to shift. And it certainly happened then very successfully.
Yeah, so I see, looking at some of the numbers here, your on-premise lunch business was decimated. You lost $9 million in sales, but you ended up coming out of it with On the Borders now has a catering business that's on track to hit $16 million in 2022. So kind of take us inside of that meeting room, like take us inside those first few days. I remember it was very fuzzy. We didn't know how hard COVID would be. We didn't know how long these shutdowns would be. Kind of takes inside some of your team meetings where you said, okay, hey, people aren't coming in for lunch, but here's how we can get them in for catering. And I imagine too, that wasn't just marketing, that was working with your peers to actually execute. Like you can market it all day long, but then now they have to deliver on something new. So what was kind of some of the biggest things you learned from going through that?
You have to really think outside the box, which I know sounds so cliche, but when you've got a plan and you've got a checklist, it's kind of hard to get outside of that, right? So it was throwing some ideas around with the group that we'd never thought about before. Like, how do you sell alcohol to go? Oh, okay, we'll put it in a cup and we'll put a piece of tape on it. Let's be very creative. And then on the catering side, how do you do catering when no one wants to come together? Well, let's get some individualized catering boxes. What if your whole buffet comes all wrapped up in a little box and every person gets their own box with their name on it? And so as we started to really think about how do we service and how do we deliver On the Border a little bit differently, it was about moving quickly and being able to do some of these things very nimbly. And I think that really helped us succeed. And I have to correct you only because I'm proud of it, but as of the last time you and I spoke, the business is now $20 million almost with catering. And it's all because we said, who needs this done a little bit differently? So we went after the Marshalls of the world and the Krogers of the world who were working and who were open and who needed to feed their teams. And how do we do it a little bit differently so we keep people safe? And it became such a differentiator that it helped us win.
Oh, wow. Nice. Very nice. So that's a kind of great lesson, too, of learning something in COVID that kind of still sticks around. So it sounds like you had the more maybe office workers that were going at lunch. And then you said, well, hey, who's still working now and how can we serve them?
Exactly. And they were so grateful for the business that they've stayed on, even beyond, hey, they've surviving and thriving too, but they're grateful for how well we took care of them, that they became our consumers moving forward. And that's been such a gift.
Well, there's the delight part. I like that. So here's another lesson. You said, don't be the manager you want for yourself. Be the manager your people want and need. So how did you learn this lesson?
Well, when I became boss, right, all of a sudden I was going to be the person who managed teams and I could kind of talk about how we wanted things done. I did it the way I wanted to be treated. I love tons of independence. I love to just work on my own. I don't need a lot of direction, and I don't need a lot of validation. I'm not somebody who needs to be told, like, good job. But it was so fast and furious that people on my team were like, hey, you're so annoying. Like, we need somebody who says, good job. We need somebody who gives us more direction. Hey, I'm somebody who wants a couple more steps. And very quickly, it was my team that educated me on, hey, I want you to do these things for me so that I can be successful. And so I learned to adapt my style to others. And it was such a big learning because every time I meet somebody new who's joining my team, I spend some time really getting to know them and how do they like to communicate and how they like to work together, because it really just makes us so much more successful. Big learned lesson there.
Yeah, you know, there's that famous maxim, treat other people how you want to be treated. And I've learned a better maxim is treat other people how they want to be treated, right? Then you got to learn about them to figure that out.
That's right. That's the mantra and such a big deal in business.
So let me ask, how do you get your team in the right mindset to create successful marketing and serve the customer, right? And I'll give you an example. We've got a free digital marketing course. And I love how Flint McLaughlin, he started the course. He didn't just start teaching marketing tactics. He started by focusing on the market. We have to focus on ourselves. We have to transform ourselves if we're going to be able to transform our marketing. Created the marketer's mindset checklist, this whole checklist just to get in the right mindset and the mind frame before we even focus on the customer. So are there any tactics you found that work well in getting your team in the right mindset to serve customers? Or maybe it's different for each person on your team?
Yeah. I think it probably is a little bit different for everybody, but when we're all working on one big problem, we do spend a lot of time just making sure that we're vulnerable, that we feel collaborative, that no idea is stupid. Like before we even start to think about the guest and what the problem might be, we do spend a lot of time with each other just talking through what are possible challenges and do you feel like you're working on the things that you can control, and just spending some time giving people context before then you attack the big problem has been very helpful for us, and in working on kind of the challenges ahead.
And also, like when you say this lesson, I think it really applies to customers as well. You know, just don't manage the way you want to be managed. You know, manage the way people need to be managed. So I'll give you a story from my career. Maybe you've got a story from your career too, where you've learned that like, hey, wow, the customer could be very different from me. So when I started out, I started as a copywriter in an ad agency, and I was writing for these like second, third, fourth homes, ski and ski out homes in Vail Valley, Bachelor Gulch Village, Beaver Creek, and very wealthy, successful people were buying these homes. And I was writing a newspaper ad, and the whole concept behind it, I forgot what it was exactly, but it was the idea of, you know, sleeping in and then going to ski. And so, you know, then my boss came to me and he said, these people are the titans of industry, right? They're up at like, you know, 4 or 5 in the morning to see what the markets are doing in Asia or Europe or all this stuff. It's like, they're not sleeping in. And to me, it blew my mind. I was fresh out of college where I had very few classes before noon. I thought the whole point of being successful and rich was to sleep in. But I realized, well, wait a minute. I wrote this ad for me. I'm not buying a third home at the ski and ski out condo in Bachelor Gulch Village. I had to write it for the people I needed to write it for and get into the kind of their head. So have you ever had that experience too, that aha, where it's like, wait a minute, I'm not the customer. The customer is this person and needs this.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that you were in college and you're a little bit younger than me. You would think that I would have known this, but I remember working on wine for Chili's. I was like, hey, we don't sell any wine. Wouldn't it be great if we sold wine? Between you and I must admit, I'm a mega wine drinker. I love my wine. And I thought, well, if I love wine, everybody else must love it. So we put this whole program together, all these kinds of wine. We were going to bring them in. We put the idea in front of some consumers, and they're like, this is the stupidest thing we've ever seen. We only drink margaritas at Chili's. Like, why would you bring wine? And I was so bruised. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you want to drink it if I like to drink it? But it happens all the time. It's like going to the light. Like sometimes you forget because you put yourself in that seat and you go, well, if I like this, surely other people will like it. And much like the wine, very quickly the guest will reject and say, no, that doesn't belong here. You don't have the permission to bring it here, and don't be stupid. So I remind myself of the wine all the time whenever a new idea comes, because I really want to bring things that make sense that you want as the guest versus what I need.
That's a good lesson. Yeah, what's right for that brand? Here's another lesson you shared. Pick people you would be friends with outside of work. So how do you put this lesson into practice when you're hiring, when you're recruiting, when you're just managing your team?
Yeah, I mean, I remember being in a meeting with a whole bunch of people, and the person who was leading the meeting said, who here works with somebody they don't like? Or would you work with people you don't like? And some person was very brave and was like, I work with people I don't like. It's no problem. And then the instructor goes, well, then you must work with somebody you really don't like, and that's kind of sad. And I thought that too, because why would you spend so much time at the office working with others and not like the people that you work with? It adds so much value to your life. So not only do I think about, hey, could I be friends with you outside of the office, but I often think about, would I make a 12-hour trip to China sitting next to this guy? And it doesn't have to be that we're the same, and it doesn't have to be that we have to be best friends. But I want them to have, at least the people on the team, enough to say, if we sat together on a long flight, things to do with me and with the team that feel like are in the same value set, right? Like, do you care about the world? Do you care about the guests? Do you care about the brand the same way I do? And so that brings a lot of goodness to the team, a lot of collaborative spirit, because you're working together with people that you like and you want to hang out with. That's always a good thing.
So to me, I think one of the hardest things in marketing is managing creativity, managing that creative process, right? Because, you know, creativity is messy. It's outside the walls. It's all these things. But then you walk into, you know, most corporate headquarters, there's cubicles and 4 gray walls. And, you know, something I've written before about, it's like you can never let your creatives lose that wild spark, right? You always got to remember, no matter what you've got them working on, you got to give them a little bit of wild spark to go a little wild and kind of air it out some. Even if sometimes those things will be rejected, let them air it out some. So I just wonder, this camaraderie can be great for a team working together, camaraderie you talk about. Do you use it, or how do you have any tips for managing the creative specifically and kind of keeping that creativity in there?
I mean, I think you always have to just allow it and let it go free. And then my tip is to always still be grounded on the why, right? It's very easy. Creativity is thrown around so much in marketing, and the CFOs hate it because they think it comes with this price tag that you can't prove out. But the most successful creative moments have been the ones where you've got a lot of cool facts to support it. Like, here's a trend, or here's what I hear about the guest, here's what I hear about what's coming next, or what's happened post-pandemic. And then here's some cool creative ideas behind it. I think my advice and what has worked well in my teams is when we ground ourselves in something special that then leads to the idea versus being creative for creative sakes. Because that just doesn't help, and it doesn't give you the desired result, and it all goes back to, hey, don't just check it off the list, but be very thoughtful about why you're doing it, right?
So how do you find that something special? Do you do consumer research? You're doing A/B testing, focus groups? Do you make your team eat in 3 different on-the-border restaurants across the country every week? Or like, how do you find that that's something special, that kernel for that creativity?
There's a little bit of all of the above. And if you had any other marketer, they would say the same thing, right? Like, oh, go to the restaurant, go sit and watch a guest, go read up on what's going on in the industry, listen to the marketing podcast. I will tell you, one time one boss told me, hey, you know how you get all those 7,000 emails a day from annoying vendors, and they write you all this crazy stuff about how, are you stuck under a rock? Please write me back. Make it your mission to write back to 2. And you will discover such interesting things about what's going on in the industry and what kind of help and support's out there. And you might not hire anybody all year, but they bring a whole bunch of interesting facts. It's been such, so I do all the above, like you said, but every so often I'll pick up the phone and call a new vendor and see, hey, what new digital stack or technology are they talking about? Because it really educates me on what's out there and what kind of solutions and solves there are. That was really great advice I never forgot, and I still do it to this day.
That's so interesting. So recently we got a letter. Someone mentioned a product in the podcast, and we got an email and they said, hey, can we share this piece of the podcast because you mentioned our product well? So I think every biz dev guy out there now, every biz dev person is going to share that piece of the podcast where he said it and say, hey, Ethan Remy says, you should reply to this email. Yes. Even if, here's my Calendly, you should reply because you're going to get an idea. So
you should, but don't reply to all of them or else you won't have a job. You just have to pick a couple. Pick a couple.
The spark ridges. Okay, I like it. All right. So first half of the podcast, we talk about lessons from things you made, because that's something I think kind of unique we do as marketers. We get to make things. You talked about, making new product offerings during the pandemic. The second half, we talk about the people we make them with, as you kind of already hinted at. Such a collaborative field we're in. The people we make them with are so important. So actually, the first person you talk about is not someone you worked with per se, but it is your father, Ray Ramey. He was a businessman who worked in the airline industry, and you said from him you learned the joy of working in a fast-paced industry. So how did you learn this from your dad?
Yeah, and I have to call him out right, because he's Ray Velez, because Ramey's a married name, and that's going to be listening. That's going to be listening to the podcast, so he's going to want to make sure I call him out right.
Ray Velez.
My dad comes from the hospitality industry, and he really was my inspiration for wanting to work with people and wanting to work in the service industry. He was 40-plus years with American Airlines, and he was one of these first people who cared about building teams that are happy, because happy teams lead to happy guests, right? Lead to happy people that you take care of. And I remember we would travel together on the airplane. We'd be going somewhere, and one time we were sitting in first class, and we had this great flight attendant. Like, she just took such good care of us. And then the way off the plane, my dad pulls her aside. I'm standing kind of off watching him, and he gives her a pen, like an American Airlines pen. And he said to her, good job. You did really good work today, and I'm grateful for what you did and for taking care of us. And her face was like as if you'd given her a treasure. I learned much later that it wasn't about the pen, that it was about that moment when you just take a second to thank and recognize. And it's been something I've always wanted to do and think about in my career. But it influenced the way in which I manage teams and look out for people. Just take a moment of recognition, and the result is just life-changing for someone.
That's beautiful. Are there things that you've done? I know, sometimes on an offsite, there'll be like someone will get an award or reward, or, sometimes it's just pulling people aside and giving them a gift card, or whether it's giving them a raise or promotion or something. What do you do to kind of find those special moments with your team when they're going above and beyond and really recognize them and make them feel that?
Yeah, I think all those tools are great, right? We'll do recognition cards. We'll call people out when they get promoted. I think an easy, quick one is just an email. An email, and you copy a whole bunch of people. Or you would not believe when the email goes out to the organization. I just sent one out for somebody who's with the organization, who's been with the organization for over 21 years. And she started on her birthday, and she's been with us 21 years. So I wrote this quick little email about how she turned 21 and she is 21, and how grateful we were for her impact, and that she to this day made the brand better than when she first started. And she wrote me directly and said that she'd really been touched by just me remembering and sending out a quick little note. And in this world of virtual, recognizing her by including so many people in the communication, it just doesn't take a lot, but it packs in so much.
It's noticing that. It's actually having your ears perked up to see that. It's not just the thing you do. It's actually noticing and listening for it.
Right.
So you mentioned, I hinted at this in the introduction. One key lesson you mentioned, I think probably it sounds like maybe the most transformative lesson in your career: ditch the to-do and focus on doing the activities that drive the desired results. And you said you learned it from Wyman T. Roberts. He is the president and chief executive officer and director of Brinker International Incorporated, and the president of Chili's Bar and Grill of Brinker International. So how did you learn this from Wyman?
Yeah, he recently retired, so we wish him the best. And he was my boss many years ago. Even at that point, he was still very senior and very smart. And he called me in to do my review. First time I'd done something like that with him. So I was very nervous, but very excited because I'd done a lot of great work. I had a long list of things that I had accomplished and had taken off my to-do list. Look at everything I'd done. So I walk in and walk him through it. And at the end of it, he goes, yeah, we're still sales negative. So do you think that that all these things that you've done got the results that we wanted? And I was like, but I did all these things. So yes, but the desired result, we needed to drive positive sales for the year. Did we get it done? No. Revisit your list. And it was so game changing. Like you said at the beginning, it has been the mantra of my life because I see it happen all the time to people. People come in and walk in to see me for their review, and they'll say the same thing. And when I talk to them about, hey, what if you redid your list so it delivers on that one thing you need to get done? What will your list look like? And inevitably, someone takes a pen and they start to scratch things off. Because if you're like that, if you're a planner, or even if you're not, if you're just somebody who feels like, here's the things you asked me to do, but I didn't even think about changing the list when we needed to, it happens to all of us. And if you continue to re-edit and edit your list so that you deliver the desired result, you will get there. And it's like I said, game-changing.
Well, here's where I think it gets tough. I know it's something I'm guilty of. It's kind of a time management thing, right? So, I heard Seth Godin talk about this. I'm going to kind of butcher his quote, but he said, hey, if you got to the end of your day and you got through all those emails and you got through your inbox, but you didn't make something beautiful, he's like, what did you really do? And I think part of the challenge is, it's we focus on the urgent, and then now, all these little emails, we've got all these little tasks we need to do, all our tasks in the week. But like, how do you find, I think it's that time management thing. How do you find that time? So you just kind of got to pick your head up out of the laptop. You got to pick your team up out of what they're doing. And you really got to have that space where you air it out and really try to come up with those new ideas and kind of new ways of thinking about things. Do you have any like time management tricks or advice you've learned to kind of have the time to question that checklist?
This is kind of one of my favorite questions you've asked because most of the time I tell this story and people are like, oh, wow, okay, I'll go do that. And then I think to myself, I wonder how they're going to do it because it wasn't easy for me. I had to go back to my desk and be like, how the heck do you rewrite the list? And what do I take on and off? So I actually had to go educate myself on it. And a couple of tips that I still use to this day is one, the thing that keeps you up at night on your list, the one that stresses you out the most, put at the top of the list and move the others down. And it's inevitable for humans. There's one or two. Most of the time, it's not all of them. And it could be stupid. It could be hey, I need to take my clothes to the dry cleaner or else I'm not going to have any clothes next week. Put it at the top of the list if it's keeping you up at night, and you'll feel better and you'll start to conquer the rest. And then the other, which I wasn't doing at the time, was putting your personal and professional checklist items on the same list. And that would stress me out even more because I have kids and I have a husband, I have this life, and then I have this professional one, and I was taught to blend them and prioritize them then the same, like what are the most critical. And then I felt so much better at the end of the day because I was able to handle some of the ones that were important to me personally and some of the ones that were very important to the business. And I used those tools to kind of help manage critical, keeping me up at night, important, professional, and personal, and the list making has gotten better for me, and hopefully with those tips, it'll get better for others.
I mean, I like that. I know what you're talking about because I think the reason it's hard is there's a mental weight to it, right? Like some of those tasks, those critical ones, And when you could remove that mental weight, because as I mentioned with kind of the marketer's mindset and the marketer's mindset checklist, it's kind of all about getting into that right mindset to have. The thing we do is hard. So, when you think of careers, I mean, some people tell them today, but 100 years ago, 200 years ago, if you worked in a factory and it's like, okay, you go into that factory and you stamp out that, auto body or whatever, and you go in there and you could go in there and you do it and you do as much as you can and you I feel fulfilled. I stamped out a bunch of auto bodies. We've got to navigate. Sometimes we've got to do something that hasn't been done at all. And I think maybe this is a good time to talk about kind of you coming into On the Border. I think you're looking for trying to do something transformative. And I think one kind of point example of that is the Cinco de Mayo, where you lifted sales by $1.5 million compared to a typical Thursday, 9% year-over-year growth from the Cinco de Mayo. So can you kind of take us into, and maybe the numbers are higher since we last talked there too, but can you take us into to some of that as an example of saying, okay, we can't just check off the list and do this how we've done before. We've got to kind of air it out and see, how can we revisit and rethink about this?
Yeah, and there's a good and sad story behind that success, because when the pandemic is kind of starting to not be as crazy, right? And people start to open in their doors and we open our dining rooms. We didn't open our dining room in time for the Cinco de Mayo of the years before, of a couple years before. And people wanted to celebrate. So they showed up in masses and we were not ready. And in a matter of a day, we had 10,000 people write us and complain that we had ruined their holiday. And I and the president of the brand and others in the brand wrote everybody back and did a lot to win people's business back. But I said to myself, never again. And so much of the success that you talked about with the latest Cinco de Mayo has been building. The last couple of years have been amazing because we learned our lesson. We learned how to manage the people that we have and the inventory that we have and how many people we can get through the restaurant and how much can we sell through online. So all that and how do you manage the flow became very important. We also got a little bit more streamlined in what we offered for the day. Hey, it's going to be these margaritas and these special items, and then that's it. And let's just execute that well. And then let's go advertise it and talk to people about how we're the headquarters place for Cinco de Mayo. So much of the success from that program came from a disaster. And we really had to dust ourselves off and rethink and redo. And the learning has really yielded some tremendous results. And some of the stuff that we had on our checklist that wasn't driving results are all these promotions and all these deals and all these things that we were doing that just took us away from executing right so that we can deliver on big sales. And when we fixed that, we got better.
I mean, that's beautiful because there's so many times where the smartest things we ever do are from a mistake we made, right? It's a painful mistake. I'm never making that mistake again. But I just got to ask you, 10,000 complaints. How did you even wrap your arms around that? How did you even figure out how to address that? Right? It just seems overwhelming.
It was overwhelming. It took us probably 3 weeks to get through every single person, but we were committed to talking to every single person. And whenever they wanted a refund, we refunded them. Whenever they said we could make it up to them, we sent them coupons. And whenever they just wanted an apology, we apologized. We did it publicly, through our social channels, but then we did it one-on-one. It was overwhelming, but we were committed because that's our stronghold, right? It's the day that we own, and we were not going to have people not think about us on Cinco de Mayo. So guest recovery is a huge part of marketing, and people forget about it a lot. They shouldn't, because it really feeds your bucket and it brings people back. And in an industry like mine where labor is so tight and sometimes we don't have enough people to make the experience as fantastic as it should be, and sometimes I have to say we're sorry, we're very focused on getting it right.
That's great. That's fantastic. All right, let's talk about one last lesson here. You said build each other up. You learned it from Diane Sanford, Chief People Officer at Local Favorite Restaurants. So how did you learn this from Diane?
Well, we were the only 2 senior female leaders within the organization at On the Border, and that struck us as silly because diverse voices and having all kinds of different people at the table are important. It just brings in different voices. And so she had a tremendous commitment for bringing in and elevating women within the organization. And I will tell you, for a long time, I was so committed to my career that I wasn't as focused on that. And she was the one that said to me, with your background and your experience and the gifted career that you've had, you have got to share your learnings and some of the things you and I talked about today with others so that others can come through and be successful and we can have all these diverse voices within our organization. And so she and I spend a lot of time with women leaders and developing them and providing content that was appropriate, because we felt that at the end of the day, if you felt cared for and you felt heard and you felt understood, you would want to be a part of our culture, and they'll stay and they'll grow, and then more voices would be around the table, and she and I wouldn't be the only ones sitting in the C-suite.
And so, and it's not, you formed like a specific group where you, like, every quarter you would kind of pick some rising stars, and what would you do with them?
Yeah, she spearheaded it, and I supported very much so this idea of bringing in kind of our high-performing, really talented female leaders within the organizations. Sometimes we did it in person, sometimes we did it virtually. Sometimes it was about just sharing the challenges and stories of running the business every day. Sometimes we would bring in important speakers and talk about other organizations and trends and things that could help them. And sometimes it was about developing a toolkit. A real understanding of how to be a great leader and how to find your voice and how to lean in, that all made them feel like they were part of something important, and then and made them more successful at the jobs that they did every day, which are not easy. And especially for women in the restaurant industry, it's not easy. So we recognize that and we try to help them make it a little bit better.
Oh, great. So we've talked about a lot of things, Edith, and a lot of qualities of a marketer. If you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
I mean, you're going to laugh, right? Because you brought it up at the beginning, but I still think creativity is at the center of it all. It just has to be very thoughtful and very smart and very and very grounded in what the business is. And I think sometimes, and it's happened to me a lot, is people get very wrapped up in the numbers and in the P&L, and I get that. That's all very important. How much is it going to cost, and what is it going to yield? But don't allow that to keep you from just thinking big and thinking differently. Some of the greatest moments in my career have been about, hey, post-pandemic, or hey, the brand was doing great, and then I'm the marketer that shows up and has to work on the comp year-over-year stuff, and what do I do now? How do I think differently? I think that that's the most important thing, is that you never take off that creative hat and constantly be thinking about, what else can we do, and how can we do it differently? Never have I liked this expression of, but we've always done it this way. It makes my skin crawl. I just don't want to do it that way. Let's do it differently. Even if it makes people a little cranky and uncomfortable, I don't want to do it like it's always done. I want to do it a little bit differently.
I love that. That's why I got into this industry, right? That's the fun of it.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, thanks so much for your time today, Edith Ann.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun talking to you.
And thanks to everyone who listened. I hope you got a lot of good lessons today.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.